and welcome back everyone to Actual English. I'm Jennifer Clyde. Today it's time for lesson 205 and the topic we have ready for you is Memorial Day. Now, Memorial Day is observed in order to honor and remember those who have risked their lives or passed away, died, serving their country. Now, in Korea it's called 현충일 and it's held on the 6th of June. Now, usually at 10 o'clock in the morning, a siren rings all over the country, and during that period for about 1 minute, people pause for silence and remember those that have risked their lives and sacrificed their lives for us or for our country. Now, in America, Memorial Day is celebrated every last Monday of May, so it changes every year. But it's very similar how the American flag, as is the Korean flag, it's hung at half-staff. Okay, we'll be talking about that later on in more detail. And what happens is, not at 10 o'clock in the morning, but in America, it's at 3 p.m., where people are asked to pause for silence for about a minute in honor of those that have risked their lives for us. So it's a very important day. In the States, I believe there are parades that go on as well. In Korea, there is a Memorial Day ceremony that's held at the National Cemetery, I believe, in Seoul. So we'll be talking about Memorial Day more in detail as we begin with Actual Talk.
So I heard today is Memorial Day in Korea, and I know Korea has maybe a couple observations that they do during this day, but I was wondering, what about the UK? Do you guys have a similar holiday?
We do. We have something called Remembrance Day, or if you're a child, you might call it Poppy Day, from the poem In Flanders Fields.
Oh.
Because during the First World War, there were a lot of poppy fields, you see. So it's quite common now, especially if you watch TV or anything like that on the day, that people will be wearing a poppy on their shirt or on their blazer.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, we have our date in November.
Right.
It's quite late on. I think in the States it's in May or something.
Yeah, so in the States it's celebrated the last Monday of May every year. So the day itself changes. And I think it's originated from observing, the Civil War that happened in the States. But now, of course, it extends to like every war and every situation that maybe a service member has died.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think they have like particular ceremonies and maybe parades, kind of just remembering.
Yeah. I mean, in Korea, I noticed last year that there was a siren that went off on that day.
Right.
Which is different. We don't have that in the UK.
Yeah.
Do you know if there are any other sort of practices that happen on the day?
So I also heard after that siren, there's supposed to be like a 1 minute of silence or a minute of prayer, just to, lift up time to remember the service people that died in the Korean War and other encounters.
Yeah.
And then they also fly the flag at half-staff, I think, just to represent mourning.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just an important way or a good way of showing respect and honoring the people who died during the wars.
Yeah, I think it's, like you said, it's a great way to honor them and kind of just remember the sacrifice that they made for this country. So
yeah, absolutely.
Today's Actual Talk conversation between Michelle and Eugene was centered around Memorial Day. So perhaps talk about the importance of Memorial Day, how it is in the UK, for example, and the US, and of course in Korea. What happens, for example. So here, let's take a look. Michelle begins by saying, I heard today is Memorial Day in Korea. And I know Korea has maybe a couple observances that they do during this day. An observance is like a procedure or a custom that is practiced, especially for a special occasion, a certain occasion. So we're talking about the things that are practiced or a custom that's practiced on a particular day, okay? And she says, but what about the UK, or what about in the UK? Do you guys have a similar holiday? I would believe so. Eugene says, we do. We have something called Remembrance Day. Okay, so let's take a look at have something called something. This is one of our patterns for today. It's our first one. Now, if you want to introduce something to someone or talk about something that may be unheard of or new to the person you are talking to, you can introduce it by saying, we have something called so-and-so. There is something called so-and-so. So he's talking about the UK. He says, we have something called Remembrance Day. Or if you're a child, he says, you might call it Poppy Day. Why? Because it's from the poem In Flanders Fields, because during the First World War, there were a lot of poppy fields. So perhaps this is a poem, In Flanders Fields, that a lot of children read. So they are familiar with it. So they often call it, or they have something called Remembrance Day, perhaps a day to remember or honor in this case. But kids often call it Poppy Day. Okay, let's move on. So it's quite common now that people will be wearing a poppy on their shirt or on their blazer. Okay, now wear something on their shirt, wear something on their blazer, wear something on their sweater. Okay, what does that mean? Let's say, for example, on Parents' Day in Korea. Now, parents, what do they usually wear on their chest? Their sons and daughters usually give them carnations. And what they do is they wear those carnations on their chest. So here when we say people will be wearing a poppy, which is a red flower, they'll be wearing a poppy on their shirt or on their blazer. It just means that they will perhaps have a pin or something to pin the poppy or the red flower on their chest or somewhere on their sweater, their shirt, or blazer. Okay? Now, we have the word blazer here, B-L-A-Z-E-R. It's pronounced blazer. It's just another word for a jacket. Usually it's a light jacket, very similar to a uniform. So young students may wear a blazer if they are a part of a club or maybe a school uniform. But even adults wear blazers. Think of it as just a light jacket, okay? A jacket that's not too formal, not too informal, not casual, not too formal. It's somewhere in between, semi-casual or semi-formal, I guess. Now, and then he says, we have our day in November. In November. So that special day comes in November, and it's quite late on. Late on meaning it comes later in the year. November is almost at the end of the year, so that is what he means. And then he says, I think in the States, it's in May or something. That's right. It is in May. It comes on the last Monday of May. So now we know they have a day called Remembrance Day in the UK, and it usually falls in November. Okay, it's in November, and Memorial Day in the US is celebrated on the last Monday of May, that is. Okay, and then Michelle says, yeah, in the States, it is celebrated the last Monday of May every year. You can say it is celebrated on. Okay, it's celebrated on a certain day. Now, one thing for you all to remember is just because people say celebrate doesn't mean that it is a happy event. Okay, celebrate can mean to commemorate, remember, honor as well. So days even such as Memorial Day can be celebrated. Okay, it is a day that is respected and honored by a lot of people. Okay, don't just think of celebration. Okay, it can be used in these situations as well. So the day itself changes. She means every year it's different. And I think it started from observing the Civil War, but now it extends to every war and every situation that a service member has died or has passed away, okay, or was sacrificed. So we're talking about observing something. Basically means to honor or to commemorate. Everyone is paying their attention to a certain occasion or a situation they are honoring it or commemorating it, you can say that they are observing it. Okay? So it's basically extended to every war and situation that a service member died or passed away. So it's a day that is observed in order to honor and commemorate those. So I think they have particular ceremonies and maybe parades. That is true. In the US, they do have parades and, of course, ceremonies. Okay, formal ceremonies for Memorial Day and for the fallen soldiers. Eugene says, in Korea, I noticed last year, okay, he's talking about his experience, that there was a siren that went off on that day, which is different. So I guess the siren doesn't go off in the UK because, as I mentioned in the beginning, in the introduction of our lesson today, there is a siren that goes off in America as well. It's just at a different time. It goes off in the afternoon at 3 p.m. In Korea, it goes off in the morning at 10 a.m. So he's talking about that siren that goes off. Now, go off. Past form would be went off. An alarm can go off. A bomb can go off. So if you say a siren, which is kind of a bell, it means to ring. If you say a bomb went off, you're talking about a bomb exploding. Okay? Just remember making a sound. Okay. So a siren went off on that day, which is different. And he says we don't have that in the UK. Now he says, do you know if there are any other practices? We're talking about customs, perhaps, that happen on that day. And Michelle says, I also heard after that siren goes off, there's supposed to be a 1 minute of silence or a 1 minute of prayer. We're talking about a given time, okay? A 1 minute prayer time, a 1 minute of silence. It's put that way as well. Now, what is that 1 minute dedicated for or dedicated to? It is to remember the service people that died in the Korean War and other encounters. Okay, remember. You remember them, you honor them. And of course, you think about many things. You think about their sacrifices. You also thank them, to yourself. So it's like a prayer or a minute of silence where you pause. And then they also fly the flag at half staff, I think, just to represent mourning. So we have some vocab words here as well. And then what happens? She says, they also fly the flag at half staff. Fly, in this case, would mean to hang, okay? You could fly a flag, which means to hang a flag on a flag pole. Now, this expression is used very commonly, especially on days like Memorial Day, okay? At half staff means to hang a flag on a flagpole, either halfway up or halfway down. Not all the way up at the top, but somewhere in the middle. Okay, that's flying a flag at half staff or at half mast. We'll be going over that later on with a sentence, with a sample sentence as well. So this is what she knows. Now, what about mourning? You can mourn for someone, which means to grieve. A mourning could be a period or a time of sadness. So it is a time that people express their grief or their sadness. It's a time of sadness, mourning that is. Okay, so here we go. Eugene says, I think it's an important way of showing respect and honoring the people who died during the wars. We're talking about people who? Fallen soldiers. Fallen soldiers, we're talking about fallen. Not soldiers that fell down, but fallen soldiers, meaning soldiers that died or passed away. Okay, and then let's move on. Michelle says, yeah, like you said, it's a great way. It's a wonderful way. It's an amazing way to honor them meaning fallen soldiers once again, and remember the sacrifice they made for this country. So let's take a look at sacrifice. A sacrifice is something that is offered, killed, destroyed, or given, for example. It can be a person, it could be a thing, it could be an animal, for example. But here, she's saying, remember the sacrifice they made. So we're talking about the sufferings, okay, they may have experienced. We're talking about sacrifices, the sufferings that these fallen soldiers, experience, or the sacrifice they made for their country. And of course, Eugene ends by saying, absolutely. So I hope that today's conversation wasn't too difficult to understand. There were very, very important and useful words and patterns that you can make use of when talking about Memorial Day. So keep your ears open and take a listen one more time.
So I heard today is Memorial Day in Korea, and I know Korea has maybe a couple observations that they do during this day, but I was wondering, what about the UK? Do you guys have a similar holiday?
We do. We have something called Remembrance Day, or if you're a child, you might call it Poppy Day, from the poem In Flanders Fields.
Oh.
Because during the First World War, there were a lot of poppy fields, you see. So it's quite common now, especially if you watch TV or anything like that on the day, that people will be wearing a poppy on their shirt or on their blazer.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, we have our day in November.
Right.
It's quite late on. I think in the States it's in May or something.
Yeah, so in the States it's celebrated the last Monday of May every year. So the day itself changes. And I think it's originated from observing, the Civil War that happened in the States. But now, of course, it extends to every war and every situation that maybe a service member has died.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think they have particular ceremonies and maybe parades, kind of just remembering.
Yeah. I mean, in Korea, I noticed last year that there was a siren that went off on that day.
Right.
Which is different. We don't have that in the UK.
Yeah.
Do you know if there are any other sort of practices that happen on the day?
So I also heard after that siren, there's supposed to be a 1 minute of silence or a minute of prayer, just to lift up time to remember the service people that died in the Korean War and other encounters.
Yeah.
And then they also fly the flag at half staff, I think, just to represent mourning.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just an important way or a good way of showing respect and honoring the people who died during the wars.
Yeah, I think it's, like you said, it's a great way to honor them and kind of just remember the sacrifice that they made for this country. So
yeah, absolutely.
Let's now continue on with today's actual expressions. I have selected 6 vocab words for you. Let's take a look at them one by one. Observance. As I mentioned, some synonyms are ceremony, honoring, or a service, or even a ritual. We're talking about, a procedure or a ceremony or a rite that is held for a particular occasion. Okay, that is an observance. What about blazer? This is simple. We're simply talking about a jacket. It's not too formal, doesn't mean it's too casual. It's somewhere right in the middle. That's a simple jacket. What about observe? It means to honor. You could observe a special day. Keep, remember, respect, or commemorate as well. Okay, observe. Practice. We're not talking about practicing a certain skill. We're not talking about practicing a sport, for example, or an exercise. We're talking about a practice in the noun form, as you see, and in that case, it would mean a tradition or even a custom. Okay? What about mourning? It's pronounced exactly the same way as we say, I wake up at 9 o'clock in the morning. Morning, afternoon, evening. The pronunciation is the same. Mourning, and we're talking about grief or grieving or sorrowing. Okay? Mourning could be a time of sadness or a time of grief as well. And we have sacrifice. Here we go. It's a strong s sound, so it's not sa. It's not sa, but it's sa. Sacrifice. Sacrifice. Synonyms are suffering or even killing in some cases, okay? All right. Now let's move on to today's patterns then. The first one is have something called. And this is what Eugene said. He said, we have something called a Remembrance Day, right? You can also say we have what is called a Remembrance Day. Here's a sample sentence. In Korea, we have something called 정. Okay? In Korea, we have something called 정. Especially when it comes to talking about something or explaining something that may be new to somebody, that may be very different to somebody. When you want to introduce something quite unique or different or new, it's a great way to begin by saying, well, we Koreans have something called so-and-so. Okay? If you want to talk about a special day, you should say, in Korea, we have something called a something day. So please do keep that in mind. Okay, let's move on to our next pattern. Go off. Go off. I did explain to you. Today we were talking about a siren that goes off, usually in Korea, at 10 o'clock in the morning for about asking people to pause for about a minute in honor and to remember those that have sacrificed their lives for us. Go off means to ring or to explode. In today's case, it meant to ring. I didn't hear my alarm go off this morning. In other words, I didn't hear my alarm ring this morning. Okay, one more time. I didn't hear my alarm go off this morning, so I overslept. That's what you can say. Let's take a look at one more pattern. Now, we were talking about the Korean flag and the American flag being flown at half-staff. Okay, so we're flying a flag on a flagpole, but not all the way up there, but somewhere in between. Halfway up, halfway down. So, at half-staff is one way, or at half-mast is another way as well. The Korean flag is usually flown at half-staff on Memorial Day. Let's try it one more time. The Korean flag is usually flown at half-staff on Memorial Day. Okay, a flag that is hung or flown halfway up a flagpole. So please do practice these patterns more on your own. And of course, as always, job well done.